You ever walk into a room and feel like everybody already decided who you are before you even open your mouth? That's exactly what happened the day this story begins. I was 15 years old, nervous but hopeful, stepping into a brand new high school. My mom had worked 2 jobs just to move us into what she thought was a better neighborhood, a place where opportunity would finally knock on my door. But the moment I walked through those polished white hallways, I could feel the stairs drilling into my back like tiny little needles. It wasn't just curiosity, it was judgment. One kid whispered, not even low enough for me to miss it, "What's he doing here?" Another snickered, "Don't scuff up the floors." I laughed it off on the outside, but inside, my chest felt like it was caving in. I wanted to disappear, to shrink down into the tile, but disappearing wasn't an option, not when every move I made seemed to be put under a microscope. The worst part? The teachers weren't much better. They gave me that same look, half surprise, half suspicion, like my presence in their classroom had tilted the balance of the universe. And you ever notice how some smiles ain't smiles at all? They're daggers wrapped in sugar. That's what I got every day. I tried to focus on class, but the whispers grew louder. Bet he can't even keep up. Wonder how long he'll last. And let me ask you, what do you do when you're cornered, not with fists, but with words, when your very skin becomes the punchline? I kept my head down, thinking maybe if I worked harder, studied longer, they'd see me as more than just a color. But no matter what I did, they found another way to remind me I didn't belong. The cafeteria was the breaking point. Food trays clattering, voices echoing, and suddenly one boy stood up and shouted across the room, "Hey, don't sit there, this table's for clean hands only." Laughter exploded low, like fireworks, bouncing off every wall. My ears burned, my throat tightened, and I swear my heart wanted to punch straight out of my chest. That was the moment I realized they weren't just trying to exclude me. They wanted to humiliate me. But here's the thing they didn't know. Humiliation is just gasoline. And me? I was about to learn how to light a match. I sat there frozen, tray heavy in my hands like it was filled with lead and shame. Laughter ricocheted around the cafeteria like a pinball, and for a beat it felt like the whole room had become a theater built to showcase me. How do you eat when everyone is eating your dignity for dessert? I wanted to disappear, to fold into the tray, but disappearing backfired. People noticed absence faster than presence. A girl across the table slid her tray closer and mouthed, "Sorry," and that small kindness felt like a secret lifeline, and also a reminder that mercy was optional in this place. After school, I hid in the library where pages didn't care about my skin. Pages asked only for attention and patience, and for a while the world made sense again. I convinced myself if I worked harder, if I got grades sharp enough to cut through prejudice, they'd have to respect me. Ambition as armor. Cute plan. Reality arrived with a laugh track. 2 kids plotted a prank to make my face the joke of the week. "Make him the meme," one whispered like it was a trophy, and suddenly I was less a person than a punchline queued for upload. You feel helpless when your face becomes entertainment. How do you compete with 100 phone cameras and 1,000 imagined witnesses? The clip spread through the school like wildfire, reactions rapid and ruthless. Some laughed at the edges, others scrolled pretending neutrality. Teachers asked questions that felt like accusations. Classmates offered sympathetic smiles that tasted like pity. My mother held me up and said words that were both balm and burden. "Define yourself. Don't let them." Those words landed like seeds, but seeds take time to break concrete. I practiced breathing like a boxer between rounds. Humor became my secret weapon. I joked about absurd things, tried to redirect a script written by other people, cracked a sarcastic line when someone expected me to crumble. Rhetorical questions looped in my head. Who owns a story? Who gets to laugh? Interrupting the pattern, I started answering my own questions out loud, which felt like stealing back a mic. The more I spoke, the less power the clip seemed to have. My voice pushed back against the echo. Still, anxiety lingered. Walking down the hall felt like navigating a minefield of glances. Fear sat beside me like an uninvited guest. But alongside that fear, a new thing grew. Decision. If humiliation was fuel, what could I build with it? Revenge? Maybe. Justice? Maybe. I wanted dignity. That night I made a promise into the dark. I would not let their laughter be the last word on me. The next morning I walked into school wearing the same hoodie I always did because clothes aren't armor but routine helps. People glanced, some with curiosity, others with the same amusement that had become background noise. I kept my shoulders steady, practicing a kind of calm that felt rehearsed and fragile. Inside, my chest hammered. What would happen if I walked straight into the principal's office? What would happen if I laughed along with them? What would happen if I did nothing? Questions stacked like unread emails. I started small, answers in class, loud enough that whispers had to duck for cover. I raised my hand not to prove anything, but to reclaim space. "Can you explain that again?" I'd ask, and suddenly the classroom shifted, attention tilting toward me. It wasn't dramatic, not yet, but the ripples mattered. Between answers, I slipped in jokes so dry they cracked the tension. "I read the textbook last night. Riveting stuff, right?" Some smirked. A few actually chuckled. Humor became a tiny rebellion and a breathing exercise. Oh, outside the jokes, I built allies. That girl from the cafeteria introduced me to a kid in art class who loved jazz and terrible puns. Another student, quiet and observant, started saving me a seat. Little acts added up to something I hadn't expected, belonging by accumulation. I noticed moments where assumptions slipped. Someone hesitated before a snide remark, another followed a laugh with a question instead of a kick. Change? Or just the calm before another storm? I learned to listen for the difference. Then the pranksters escalated. They swapped my locker combination, left notes that smelled like cheap bravado, and once wrote graffiti that made my stomach drop. The administration called it immature behavior. My teachers labeled it teenage drama. Their words felt like bandages on a broken bone. Social media amplified everything, clips and comments piling like snow. Who moderates a rumor when it wants to be famous? Adults can be blind. Technology rarely sleeps. That realization felt less like discovery and more like a verdict. Fear returned in colder form. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, listing options: move out, transfer, fight back, or endure. None seemed neat. Yet something else stirred, a plan not about petty revenge, but about exposing the architecture of cruelty. I began collecting evidence, not for spectacle, but to show a pattern. If humiliation was performance, records were my script notes. Would their curtain finally fall? I told myself patience could be a weapon. Patience sharpens into quiet power. By the time winter rolled around, I had notebooks stuffed with details, dates, times, names, even screenshots I printed out from my phone. Call it obsession, but I called it survival. Each page felt like stacking bricks, building a wall between me and the chaos. I knew one day I'd need this evidence, not just to clear my name, but to prove that laughter and cruelty weren't harmless, but collecting wasn't enough. I had to decide, when do you flip the script? The answer came one afternoon during history class. Mr. Harlan asked us to prepare a project about injustice in America. While most kids groaned and chose easy topics, I sat there thinking, isn't the lesson walking these halls every day? I decided my project would be about racism, not the kind buried in textbooks, but the kind breathing in lockers and cafeterias. Some kids rolled their eyes when I announced my topic. One muttered, "Of course he would." But something in me smiled because this time the joke was on them. I worked for weeks piecing it all together. I quoted Dr. King, but I also quoted the graffiti on my locker. I mentioned the civil rights marches, but I also mentioned the video clips spread around school. I built a bridge between the history they thought was finished and the history still being written on my skin. It was raw and it was risky. Would they laugh? Probably. Would they squirm? Definitely. Presentation day arrived. My palms were slick, my throat dry, but I stood at the front of the class with my notebook in hand like it was a shield and a sword. I spoke slowly, carefully, but with fire in my chest. I told them what it felt like to be turned into a joke for something you can't change. I asked them, if history repeats itself, are you proud of the role you're playing? Silence spread like ink. Some kids looked down at their desks, others shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, no one laughed. When I finished, the teacher cleared his throat, caught between admiration and discomfort. He said, "Powerful work." I didn't need applause. The silence was enough. For once, my voice carried louder than their whispers. And that was the spark. From that day forward, I wasn't just the target. I was the storyteller. And stories? They cut deeper than insults. Word traveled faster than I expected. By lunch, half the school had heard about my presentation. Some said it was bold, others called it dramatic, and a few whispered it was dangerous. But let me ask you this. Why is truth always treated like dynamite? People laughed when lies spread, but the moment I stood up with facts, everyone acted like I was shaking the ground beneath their feet. Maybe I was. Maybe that's exactly what they needed. Not everyone liked it, though. The boys who had started most of the pranks cornered me in the hallway the next day. One leaned in close and said, "So you think you're some kind of hero now?" His breath smelled like cheap soda, his words like vinegar. I forced a smile and answered, "No, I'm just the guy who stopped laughing." That line wasn't planned. It slipped out like my mouth had been waiting months to deliver it, and judging by the flicker in his eyes, it hit its mark. Still, fear followed me like a shadow. I kept checking over my shoulder, wondering when they'd strike back. Every slam of a locker made me flinch. But alongside that fear was something new: respect. Kids I barely knew nodded at me in the hall, like I had done what they wished they could. A few even sat with me at lunch. The table that once felt like a spotlight of humiliation started to feel like a stage of quiet rebellion. Then came the turning point. During an assembly, the principal announced an essay contest about building community. Irony, right? But instead of rolling my eyes, I saw an opening. What if I used their platform to throw the mirror back in their faces? I stayed up nights writing, not in anger, but in honesty. I wrote about the cafeteria humiliation, the graffiti, the laughter that stings harder than fists. And then I flipped it. I wrote about resilience, about humor, about choosing to respond instead of retreat. Submitting that essay felt like tossing a grenade wrapped in paper. I didn't know what would happen. Would they ignore it, tear it apart, or would the truth finally rattle more than just the lockers? I walked into school the next day with a mix of terror and hope, wondering if this was the moment everything shifted or exploded, and deep down I whispered to myself, "Let them read it, let them know." The results came 2 weeks later, announced over the crackling loudspeaker. My name was called first. "First place," the principal said, like the words tasted strange in his mouth. For a split second, the whole school froze. Then applause scattered through the gym like raindrops. Some clapped politely, others with real energy, and a few just crossed their arms tighter. But me? I stood up slowly, heartbeat drumming in my ears, and walked to the stage with every step echoing louder than the last. Standing there, I looked out over the same faces that once laughed at me. Funny thing, nobody was laughing now. Some looked away. Others stared as if seeing me for the first time. I accepted the little plaque they handed me, but truth be told, that piece of plastic meant nothing. What mattered was the silence that followed. Silence heavy with realization. Silence that belonged to me. Of course, the pranksters weren't done. After the assembly, one of them hissed, "Enjoy your 15 minutes." I shrugged, smiled, and answered, "That's all it takes to change a story." That comeback wasn't rehearsed either. It was survival turning into instinct. Their scowls told me I'd won a round they never expected to lose. But here's the twist. Winning didn't erase the fear. I still felt my chest tighten when I walked past their group. I still worried about what they'd try next. Fear doesn't vanish. It mutates. Yet alongside it, courage kept growing, root by root. I started tutoring kids after school, kids who whispered that they knew exactly how it felt to be invisible. I laughed with them, joked with them, told them stories about turning pain into punchlines. Little by little, I realized I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every kid who'd ever been turned into a joke. One Friday, that same girl from the cafeteria sat beside me and said, "You key, now, you made them regret it." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer and whispered, "They can't touch you anymore. You showed everybody who they are and who you are." Her words hit harder than any applause, because that was the truth. Humiliation may have started the fire, but resilience turned it into a torch. And I wasn't done carrying it. Not yet. Spring came, and with it, a different kind of air. The same halls that once felt like cages now felt like corridors of possibility. Strange, isn't it, how perception shifts when your voice finally finds its echo? Kids who never spoke to me before started asking questions. Real ones, not the shallow, mocking kind. "How'd you stay calm? Didn't you want to quit?" I laughed, because the truth is, I wanted to quit almost every single day. But quitting would have given them the ending they wanted. And if there's one thing I learned, it's that I get to write my own ending. Not that the hate evaporated. Oh no, it just changed outfits. The whispers became quieter, the smirks less obvious, but they lingered. Sometimes I caught two of the pranksters glaring like they still wanted revenge, but it didn't scare me the way it used to. I realized something powerful. When people can't control you, they try to humiliate you, and when humiliation fails, they're left exposed, holding their cruelty like a broken toy. One afternoon, a teacher pulled me aside. She said, "You've become an example in ways you don't even realize. Don't underestimate what that means." I nodded, but inside I thought, me? An example? I was just trying not to drown. But maybe surviving visibly is its own kind of rebellion. Maybe showing the cracks and still standing is louder than a polished speech. Then came the talent show. Another stage. Another test. A friend dared me to perform spoken word. At first I laughed it off. Me? Standing up there, pouring out my guts in front of the same crowd that once booed me without sound. Terrifying. But something inside whispered, "Do it. Own it." So I wrote a piece, raw and unfiltered, about skin, laughter, shame, and turning humiliation into heat. The night of the show, I stood in the spotlight, palms sweating, knees weak. The crowd waited. I opened my mouth and the words poured out, not rehearsed, not perfect, but real. I cracked a joke halfway through, and the unexpected laughter this time wasn't sharp. It was warm. For the first time, the sound of laughter didn't cut me down. It lifted me. By the end, the applause came, not scattered, not forced, but full. And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted forever. After that night, things felt different. Not perfect, different. The same kids who once smirked at me now nodded in the hallway. A few even muttered, "Nice job at the show." Funny, isn't it? People hate you for existing, then clap when you survive their hate artistically. But I didn't mind. Respect is a strange currency, and I was finally learning how to spend it. Still, tension bubbled beneath the surface. The ringleader of the pranksters, let's call him Tyler, couldn't stand my shift from target to storyteller. He cornered me by the vending machine one day, voice low and sharp. "You think you won? You think you embarrassed me?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, you embarrassed yourself. I just turned on the lights." His jaw clenched, but his silence was louder than any insult. Sometimes silence is victory, you know? But the real victory came later. The principal invited me to read my essay at a school board meeting. At first I thought, why me? Then I realized, when you survive humiliation and turn it into narrative, people want to hear you, even if they once tried to shut you up. That night I stood in front of adults who thought racism was history, not reality. I told them about cafeteria taunts, graffiti scars, and laughter that felt like daggers. I cracked a dry joke mid-speech. History class forgot to mention that racism's elective apparently offered in our lunchroom. Some laughed nervously, some didn't laugh at all, but they listened. And that was new. Walking out, I felt taller than I ever had. My mother hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would bend. She whispered, this is just the beginning. And she was right. Because once you find your voice, you can't put it back in the box. Tyler and his crew? They tried one more stunt, spray painting something ugly on the bleachers. But this time, the school turned on them. Kids reported it before I even saw it. The same laughter that once fueled them had dried up. They weren't ringleaders anymore. They were just fools exposed under fluorescent lights. And that's when it hit me. Revenge wasn't about payback. It was about transformation, about shifting the story so humiliation couldn't breathe. I hadn't just made them regret their actions, I'd made them irrelevant. Summer crept in, slow and heavy, but the air around me felt lighter than it ever had. For the first time since stepping into that school, I wasn't walking with my head down. I wasn't checking over my shoulder, waiting for the next punchline at my expense. I was walking like someone who had turned pain into proof. And isn't that the sweetest kind of victory? The funny part is people started coming to me with their own stories. A kid who got mocked for his accent. Another who was shamed for the clothes he wore. A girl who admitted she'd hidden her curls under straighteners because she was tired of the comments. They came to me like I was some kind of confessional booth, and I listened. I laughed with them, I cried with them, and I told them the same thing I told myself. They can't define you unless you let them. Even the teachers changed. One who used to look at me like I was trouble waiting to happen stopped me after class and said, "You've taught us more than we've taught you." I didn't know whether to laugh, or cry, so I just nodded. Life has a weird way of flipping the script, doesn't it? The same system that once ignored me now held me up as an example. And Tyler? His downfall was almost anticlimactic. His own friends drifted away, tired of his bitterness. The boy who once had the loudest laugh now walked the halls in silence. I never gloated, didn't need to. Watching the power drain from his swagger was enough. Humiliation had circled back, but this time it wasn't mine to carry. Here's the thing people don't tell you. Revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in peace. In walking tall when they wanted you crawling. In making them realize their cruelty didn't cage you, it crowned you. And once that crown sits on your head, no insult, no prank, no laughter can take it off. By the last day of school, I looked around the cafeteria, the same battlefield where it all began. I sat down at a table, unshaken, unashamed. Nobody dared to move me. Nobody dared to laugh. That silence, that was my victory song. Graduation came faster than I expected. Caps and gowns, nervous chatter, the smell of summer freedom waiting outside those gym doors. As I sat among my classmates, I thought about the boy who once stood in this very building clutching a lunch tray, drowning under laughter that felt like knives. And now here I was, still standing, still breathing, stronger because of every scar they tried to carve into me. Life's funny that way. What was meant to break you sometimes ends up building you brick by brick. When they called my name, I walked across the stage, not rushing, not shrinking. My family cheered so loud the whole auditorium turned to look. For once, I wasn't embarrassed. I was proud. Proud that we'd survived, that we'd turned humiliation into history, proud that their jokes never wrote my ending. And as I shook the principal's hand, I leaned in just enough to whisper, "Told you I belonged here." His eyes widened, and that was my private applause. After the ceremony, kids who once mocked me lined up to say congratulations. Some meant it, some didn't. But that didn't matter. Their words no longer carried weight. Respect wasn't something I needed from them. It was something I had finally given myself. And let me tell you, once you own that, nobody can take it away. I walked out of that building into the sunlight, and it felt like stepping into a brand new life. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. I carried the lesson with me. Humiliation doesn't define you, it refines you. It turns laughter into fuel, pain into poetry, fear into fire. And when you rise from it, people don't just regret what they did. They remember the strength you showed in spite of it. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been laughed at for who you are, let me ask you, why give their laughter the last word? Why not write your own ending? Stand taller, speak louder, laugh back, not in mockery, but in victory. Because trust me, the sweetest revenge isn't anger, it's dignity. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own battles, then stick with me. Subscribe to this channel because here, we don't let humiliation win, we turn it into power.